Or as you're, yeah, thank you.
All set?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Good morning, it's Senate Agriculture's Thursday, January 23rd. We got a full schedule here. We're gonna start the morning off talking with Business Emergency Gap Assistance Grant Program, BGAP. We're hearing a lot about BGAP as a new committee, as with only one person that's back, and so we figured if before we were trying to make any decisions or trying to nod our head in the right directions, we ought to understand what they do. So it looks like we have Brett Long.
That's right.
Welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you.
No pressure at all.
So yes, I'm here to talk about BGAP, or the Business Emergency Gap Assistance Program, which is really kind of three programs wrapped into one. So that's probably the confusing part about it, is to unravel the different components. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development. I've been in the department almost 10 years. Some of you I know from Rutland legislative meetings and things like that. And
Yep.
Welcome, Senator Major. So let me get into it. Hazel, you running the slides? So as I say, the BGAP program initially started to provide assistance to businesses and nonprofits that suffered physical damage. The physical damage part is important as we get into the whole discussion here, from flooding events in 23. It's since been expanded to also provide assistance from damage in 24. And included in the program is damage to farms and also people who are landlords, who have multiple properties. The eligibility and calculations are a little different depending on the program. We've gotten several different appropriations to fund the different rounds that we've done. The BGAP funding is granted per physical location. That's also important, probably to some degree, for you folks in agriculture, but also for those folks who are landlords, because they could be entitled to several rounds of funding if they have multiple properties. Same idea with people. I know that I've seen some applications where farmers had multiple plots, I guess is the best way to put it. However, there is a limit of up to 3 physical locations per applicant. I won't get into the weeds there, but finding an applicant is sometimes a little tricky when you have people who incorporate different entities. So the folks have completed applications, and the way the funding works is that we pay awards based upon estimates. The idea is trying to get the funding out as quickly as possible, and we are in several of these programs just in the midst of collecting information back from applicants to confirm that they used the funding to rectify damage or to relocate. One of the options for the program is to be able to relocate to a different property. Obviously not so much of an option if you're a farmer. There is information on the awardees to date on our website. The last thing is we did carve out some funding to provide it to the Regional Development Corporation here in Washington County, who's been providing technical assistance to applicants to help them through that application process. So some definitions. The program is based on providing an award against what we've defined as net uncovered damage. So the idea is that somebody came up with estimates for the rectification of the damage to their property and provided those estimates to us, but also were required to provide any information on insurance proceeds that they received, or grants, GoFundMe amounts, and other kinds of assistance. And after we subtract that other assistance from the damage, we came up with this term net uncovered damages that we use to calculate an award.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So does the estimates of damage have to come from an independent source, or can they just go, I think I lost X amount?
It varied a little bit depending on the different round, but fundamentally we were taking people's word more or less at the damages.
Okay.
We asked people to provide some kind of substantiation, but they could have provided that. They could have come up with that substantiation themselves.
So it sounds like you're first in, middle in, last in, you're everywhere in there, it isn't and then you're just trying to round out, where else the money is and just try to figure it out as you're going. Just trying to be of assistance and then
Right.
not a hindrance, and then, okay, we'll settle this up after, but we're gonna settle at some point in time.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And emergency is defined as what type? Could it be a fire? Could it be flood? Could it be?
This program is only targeted at the different rounds of flooding that we've
Okay.
had, so only addressing flooding.
All right.
Okay?
Yep.
So eligibility requirements. As I said earlier, it needs to be a business or nonprofit that meets these criteria. It must have been physical damage. That's important in defining what we didn't pay on, which was business interruption, basically. So, if your business was fine, but you were closed because the road was closed or something like that, we didn't pay any kind of business interruption coverage. The damage could include real estate, leasehold improvements, inventory, including crop damage, machinery, equipment, and the applicant needed to attest that they were going to reopen in the same location or move to a new location in Vermont, as I said earlier, and that they would use the grant funds to remediate the damage or as a part of their relocation. Nonprofit organizations were eligible only if they were not eligible for FEMA assistance. So generally speaking, that means nonprofits that were providing community service, educational organizations, utilities, healthcare facilities, etc. Entities that were ineligible. We didn't provide assistance to municipalities, businesses, nonprofits that incurred revenue loss, as I mentioned earlier. We didn't provide assistance to individual homeowners or, as I said, nonprofits that were eligible for FEMA assistance. Any questions on all that? So we divide this up into two rounds, BGAP 1.0 and BGAP 2.0. Let me start with BGAP 1.0. So BGAP 1.0 was originally funded with a $20 million appropriation and was targeted to deal with flooding in 2020. In addition to the $20 million, we also got the proceeds of the license plate sale program and the Darn Tough stock sale program, which added about $436,000. So in total, we had about $20,436,000. The amount has been 99% or so expended. There's a little still available to cover administrative costs. We have made 560 awards to 538 businesses. The difference, obviously, is a couple of those organizations received more than one award. The average award in that program was $33,000. And there's a listing here of the awards by industry. So of the 560 awards, about 134 were classified as agriculture. It's not a terribly scientific because people classified themselves, but gives you an idea for the agricultural awards. And then there's also a listing here of how those awards shook out by county. So some geographic information.
Was there any income eligibility or anything as far as that? You make too much money, you can't, no, you have enough? Or...
Yeah, the short story is yes. There were limitations on the amount of the award, and I think they're actually described in the later slide. Let me see if I can find it. Maybe it's the earlier. But the short answer is yes, that there were in BGAP 1.0, there were limitations based upon the number of employees you had, so that you could receive, your award was limited based upon the number of employees you had. So in BGAP, sure.
Just, yeah, for a sec. I wasn't aware that Windsor had that much damage from floods. Washington, obviously, you've got Barry, really hard hit, Montpelier, Lamoille, that makes sense. But I wasn't aware that Windsor.
Yeah.
Southern part of the county,
Right.
as well as Quechee was
Okay. All right.
devastatingly hit.
Right.
If I can. In my county.
Right. I appreciate that because I live in Windsor County. What's the town that News World is in? It's the southern, especially southwestern corner of the county. It's actually covered by the Regional Development Corporation in Springfield. Those towns had some significant damage.
Just wasn't publicized as much, obviously.
I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so then moving on, we moved to BGAP 2.0, and this is where it gets a little complicated. We have two different appropriations. $7 million was appropriated to deal with 24 flood damage. But an additional $5 million was appropriated to deal with remaining 23 flood damage. And so that 5 million is broken into two different buckets. The first being folks who did not apply for 23 damage initially. So we refer to that as new 23 damage. And then we're actually now just about at the stage where we're going to use whatever remains of that $5 million appropriation to make pro rata supplemental awards to the people that had 23 damage and completed an application indicating they are looking for additional assistance. Make sense so far?
Yep.
So where are we on the BGAP 2.0? As far as 23 new damage, we've made 41 awards that total just under $1 million. The average here is about $22,000 in terms of awards. And in this program, we awarded 30% of net uncovered damages up to $50,000. So far, so good?
Yep.
And then the second piece is for new 24 damage. We've awarded about 140 applications for a total of about $3.7 million. This is also 30% of net uncovered damages. However, it could be up to $100,000. This appropriation also had set-asides. 40% of the money was set aside for agricultural businesses. I think there was an understanding that agricultural businesses had really gotten walloped, particularly this time around. 10% of the funds were set aside for BIPOC awardees. So a little more breakdown on those. Well, the other thing I mentioned is that we're going to use whatever funds remain from that appropriation to provide supplemental awards. So far, we've received 61 acceptable applications for a supplemental award. I don't know how much they're going to get yet because we still need to do those calculations and we're still doing the reviews for those applications.
Thank you. Will constitute the denials?
It's a range of things. Usually they're not eligible for some reason. But sometimes it's somebody they submitted 4 applications. They were only entitled to awards on 3 properties, that kind of stuff. By and large, hopefully I sent the message at the beginning of my comments that we try to be as liberal as possible
Sure.
in getting the money out to support people.
Mr. Chair. From the time you put your application in to getting funding, rough.
That's
estimate
a
of time?
fascinating question.
Okay.
Um,
As quick as and as long as, maybe.
as quick as a few days,
Wow.
as long as a few months, probably, to be honest, because we have a very hard time getting applicants to submit all the required information in the right form. So in all of these programs, there's been a lot of back and forth with folks.
Still, I believe that's pretty quick,
Yeah,
especially when it comes to government.
yeah. So,
Has there been any clawback as you're finding out that they're getting some insurances of are greater?
yes, that's a
And how does
another
that
great
occur?
question. Well, so there are kind of 2 or 3 different ways that it's happened. The first is that we've had applicants who ultimately find that they don't need as much money as they originally said. And the first issue that comes to mind is they get a bigger insurance check than they thought they were going to get. So there have been people who've just said, you know what, I'm not entitled to as much money as I thought, and they send us a check for the difference. There's interestingly a meaningful number of applicants who would appear to have gotten frustrated in the middle of the process, and they say, you know what, I'm selling the property. I'm not going to be doing the improvements to it. So here's some money back. Oftentimes, they've already done some improvements, so they're sending us the balance back. The last piece is we are in the midst of doing monitoring of these awards, and we have a number of applicants who appear not to have been entitled to the funding, or not able, maybe I should say, not able to demonstrate the need and use of the funds. So yeah, there will be a tail here where we're continuing to monitor these and looking for documentation of the need and the use of the funds.
So, because this is in my district, in Ludlow,
Yeah,
the grocery store, Swan,
John?
Shaw's, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Shaw's, did they receive?
I know Shaw's was an awardee, but I don't know if it was the Ludlow store.
Okay,
Because I approve most of the awards, so
Right.
I recognize the names, but I
Right.
don't necessarily remember which location.
because I know they were down for almost a year.
Yeah.
And I guess my thing about this is, yes, we made them whole again, but did they do any mitigation to see if it won't happen again?
Right.
And particularly that store, which had a hill behind it, which
Right.
if there's another storm, it's going to happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know that we know enough yet to answer that question, because we are fairly early in the monitoring process. So we're not able to say, oh, they use this amount to do cleanup and this amount to do mitigation. We'll have a better handle probably in a few months. But there are a lot of very difficult situations. We've had a bunch of conversations with the owner of the store in Johnson, the supermarket in Johnson, who wasn't able to find a tenant to reoccupy the building. So as it stands now, my understanding is there's not a supermarket in Johnson, and the landlord is basically saying the prospects of finding another tenant don't look all that good, and so they're talking about giving us part of the funding back. So there's a lot of distress out there.
So it sounds like you're winding down. You got BGAP 1, BGAP 2. Sounds
Yep.
like the money's been expended, and now you're just doing your regulatory work and your auditing work and all that. And is it now is BGAP be gone? I mean, what goes on from here?
Well, it's a good question. That from the department's standpoint, we've been in the disaster recovery business for going on 5 years now, from COVID now through a couple of different flood events. So we are kicking around among ourselves whether there's something that we should contemplate to be able to have a standing program that can be implemented in the event of a disaster. But there's nothing final on that. But, the reality is that it's been kind of ad hoc because each one of these is coming out of left field and we're having to gear up and hire limited service staff and have systems available to be able to monitor this stuff, which is not in our ordinary course of business. There is another slide on agricultural outcomes, if you have questions.
No, we have to, no, absolutely.
Okay.
No, we asked you to come, we need to understand, so thank you.
So Brett, these were one-time appropriations, I assume, from probably fiscal 24 and 25?
I think that's right.
Is there anything in the governor's budget that you're aware of coming up that replenishes this, or is this?
I don't know of any.
And was any of that ARPA funds that were left over maybe?
Yes, but the 23 funding was ARPA funds that were recategorized as revenue replacement, I believe.
Okay.
Which basically was my question, all this was state funds, or is it a combination, state fund, federal funds that we were able to use as well?
My recollection is that the $20 million appropriation would have been ARPA that was redesignated into revenue replacement funds. So that one's a little betwixt and between. Would have started as ARPA, but then become state funds in terms of deployment.
Yeah.
The more recent, I believe, are general fund.
I just ask because I know, well, I don't know, I'm assuming that we'll have another flood.
Yeah.
And if you kind of look ahead to prepare for it, maybe there's something.
Yeah.
But if there's nothing.
As I say, we have kicked around some ideas,
Yeah.
but I don't think anything's been
Okay.
finalized yet.
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure on holding money, but if you budget for disaster, you don't have the disaster, does that money, can it stay in a coffer, or does it have to be cleaned out by the end of the year? So say we don't get a flood this year, but we appropriate $5 million because there's no flood right now.
Yep.
Can that $5 million stay there because it's appropriated for emergency funds? And then next year give it another 5, so now you got 10 million.
Right. I don't want to pretend to be an expert in appropriation or what's it called? Spending authority. But by and large, I think that it could be appropriated, but we'd probably need to have spending authority renewed to be able to continue to use it on the assumption that it was staying there for more than one fiscal year.
It's still getting used to all this, so it's like, it only makes sense to take the money and leave it there, so.
Right.
Because eventually, there will be another disaster then.
Right. I mean, there's one thing that we probably learned in running these programs, which is to the extent, these were meant to be business organization support programs. One of the issues is that when we provide grants to for-profit businesses, they're taxable awards. So to the extent that somebody's actually a taxpayer and they have a tax obligation, they're potentially going to lose a chunk, significant chunk of that award to taxes. So and I think this happened in Irene. I wasn't around for Irene, but one of the ideas is whether whatever is decided to be pursued in the future for disasters should be structured as an advantageous loan program, so that maybe it's no interest or no repayment for a certain period of time, whatever provisions there might be. But that way, you're providing assistance, you're providing it on a advantageous basis, but you're not having to deal with the tax consequences for for-profit businesses.
And maybe you don't know this, but I think the hardest thing as far as people finding government assistance is they just don't know where to look.
Yeah, absolutely.
How did they find you?
Well, we did a whole series of marketing. We did, I think for each one of these programs, Hazel, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we did webinars. We broadcast it through the RDCs and the RPCs. We did a lot of work with CVEDC. The RDC was providing the technical assistance to get the word out. So we tried, and we broadcasted in our social media and newsletters and all those kinds of things, as well as through the chambers of commerce and that kind of thing. So,
And actually, you've spent probably 30 million or so, and so they found you.
yeah, right. Yeah, but it's a good point, because one of the reasons we did the additional funding for new damage in 23 is those were people who, for the most part, didn't know about the program initially. So it is a little bit of a challenge. And the hard part is that you're trying to reach out to somebody who's literally up to their waist in water or mud. So they got other things in their mind at the time.
Yeah. Any more questions on this?
I don't know.
Okay.
Nicole or Mary, is there anything you want to add? So we worked with Agency of Agriculture in a partnership on these programs, and they reviewed the applications where they had self-identified as agricultural businesses. So I'll make sure to give you an opportunity to provide any comments.
Sure. For the record, Nicole Dubuque, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I think Brett did a really good job. The only thing I would add is just kind of give you a sense of what it looked like for us to get these applications so you understand the flow. Maybe that would be helpful. So we essentially deployed multiple staff within the Agency of Agriculture to work on this effort, both in 2023 and 2024. Mary Montour, who is with us right now, is one of the staff that helped kind of organize this and process applications. So we really waited until folks identified as agriculture, and then ACCD would send the applications over to us, meaning they would assign them to agriculture in the portal, and then we would assign them to one of our staff to review, which I felt was a really good process because it allowed people who were very familiar with agriculture, already familiar with these farms and kind of their operations, to be looking through the photos and the application. So that's where we came into play as far as processing, and we did much of the same thing as far as advertising as Brett spoke about with ACCD. We put it in all of our newsletters, all of our social media. We had it out in regular media as well to bring people in. And then also our field staff were telling farmers about it when they were out there. Happy to take any agriculture specific questions if you have them.
Any questions?
I don't think so.
No.
I guess we're good on that.
Okay.
Thanks for having me in.
I have a question for Mary. How is Yvonne related to you? Or is he?
Can you repeat that, Yvonne?
How is Yvonne Montour related to you?
Yes, he is. He's my husband's grandfather.
Well, he is a very dear family friend. So,
Good to know.
yes, yes.
Nice. Thank you.
You. Anything? You had another. Did you have another slide here? I thought I saw something.
I think it's just the BIPOC information.
Okay.
So it's included there if you're interested.
Okay, sounds good. Well, we want to thank you.
Thank you for having me in.
No, thank you guys for coming in. We've been hearing about this program for a while. As I said, we're new. Sounds like hopefully we won't hear a lot more about it, but we'll see. We didn't think so. We hear it in 24, and hopefully 25 and 26 and 27 will be BGAP will be gone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think Senator Colomer is probably correct in that there likely to be flooding in the future.
Yeah.
So,
Well, at least now we know how to do it.
right.
Brett, continue to make Windsor County proud.
Thank you.
Brett, I do have one more. How many dairy farms? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I don't know. Nicole or Mary are probably in a better position.
How many dairy farms applied? Yeah.
how many dairy farms applied. I don't know that information off the top of my head, but I can certainly look it up and give it to you. And do I
Okay.
see Laura Ginsburg in the background there? I'm like, do you know Laura?
But didn't we say 134
That's what
ag?
it is.
Yeah.
Or maybe just all ag?
That's all
dairy.
dairy, right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not all dairy. We had a lot of crop loss, so I would have to weed through to see how many are dairy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming in. And, if you have any more questions about that, we're gonna get you back in. Thank you guys for what you do.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Feel free to reach out if you have questions.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Are we good to continue on, Linda?
Yes, we are.
Okay, well,
We're going to just get, a little technical thing taken care of.
no problem. Should we wait a minute?
This is Laura Ginsburg Committee
Yeah.
from the Agency of Agriculture,
Hi, Laura.
Good morning.
and she's just getting on Zoom so she can show her.
Okay, sounds good. Well, take the chair whenever you're ready. And, no hurries, no worries.
Should be on now.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me this morning.
So just for anybody that's home, we have Laura Ginsburg again, New England Dairy Business Innovation Center. Gonna do an introduction and overview on the dairy update. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Laura Ginsburg. I'm the Dairy Strategy and Innovation Manager at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And I am here with you today to talk about dairy in Vermont. So I have both a dairy update from the state perspective, and then part of my role involves running the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. So I'll be talking a little bit about that as well. Just gonna get my screen share up here and then we'll go back to the top. And here we go, right to, all right. Linda, am I sharing correctly?
You are.
Excellent, thank you. So just as a little bit of background about myself, I've been with the agency for about 7 years now in slightly variable roles. I came to the agency, I have a master's degree in environmental studies where I focus on dairy policy in Montana. Montana is the only supply managed state in the nation, so I wrote my master's thesis on its supply management policy and how that impacts farmer decision making. Then I received a Fulbright Scholar Award to go to New Zealand and do essentially a match study on how our free market system impacts farmer decision making for their businesses. Did that back in 2014. And then my partner and I ran a dairy farm. Well, it was a diversified livestock farm. We milk cows, but Montana rules are very complicated. And we had an ice cream creamery for a number of years before I took the job out here, and we sold the farm and sold the cows and came east and started my job here. So at the Agency of Agriculture, my role is pretty focused on dairy all the time. I do not engage in the regulatory affairs, and I know that you've met with the division director, Evie Flory. So we work very collaboratively as a team, because without a very robust regulatory system that provides support that the industry needs, the work that I do will not be as successful in supporting business development and market development. So I will, let's see, get started here. All right, so these numbers today are sort of hot off the press. This is the December 2024 dairy farm numbers by county and animal species, and this is how we report them every month. We share this information with UVM Extension, and then they provide a dairy update that goes out publicly. Anybody can sign up for it. I will note that if you are signed up for that, or you've seen numbers prior to December 2024, it will appear that there was a large loss of farms between November and December. What it actually was a essentially like a data scrub. And we've cleaned up the data, we've cleaned up the information. And so we didn't lose a lot of farms in November to December. It's just some of the farms had duplicate entries or some had not been removed when they needed to be, when they stopped shipping milk. So as has been the case for the past decades, Addison and Franklin County remain the largest dairy producing counties in the state. We have 34 goat farms, pretty evenly spread, and 3 sheep farms. The top line you'll notice in the goat farms, there's 4 without a county. There's a processor in the state who sources milk from Canada, and our inspectors go to Canada to inspect those farms so that the milk can enter the country. So we do count them as goat farms that are inspected, but they are not Vermont-based farms. As with the rest of the country, the number of dairy farms is in decline. I think this is it's not a surprising statistic to see. So the orange line is the total number of farms, the green line is conventional farms, and the blue line is organic farms. The purple line, which I think is particularly interesting, is the number of processors. So even as the number of farms, overall farms decline, the number of processors has increased. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in some future slides. We have seen a decline at the rate that mirrors what's happening across the rest of the country. And I think if you are engaged in sort of dairy farm news coming out of other states, Wisconsin has huge declines, but they have tens of thousands of farms. So when they have a 5% decline, it's many hundreds of farms. When we have a 5% decline, it's a few dozen farms. There are some interesting trends happening right now in the industry where people are picking up their farms from areas that are shorter in water or tighter in regulation and moving to other states. And so there is a bit of a shift happening, particularly in the western states, where people are leaving California, they're leaving Idaho, and they're going to the Dakotas or Texas or Oklahoma. So those states are a little bit more on the upswing.
Yes.
Laura, this decline is significant. Is this concerning?
It is concerning. I think there's a number of different factors in play here. So part of this is the total number of farms. There has been a trend over the past, I would say, year, 18 months that we've seen in this state in particular, where farms may have been operating 2 shipping locations, and they consolidate that down to 1 shipping location. And so it comes across as a loss of a farm. It's actually a loss of a shipping location. So I think there is a little bit of nuance to the numbers. I also think that what is really important and what I try to focus on is how successful are the businesses that are in business, as opposed to how many businesses can we say that we have. And I feel like the measure of the number of businesses who get business planning, are successful business owners, are finding financial stability, has been increasing over the past few years. So that's something that I wish the graph could be a little bit more explicit about, but I think the overall number does matter, and being cognizant that there are a number of factors that are in play there, I think, is also a critical piece.
With this decline, are we, as state farmers, going to not be able to meet our demand?
So Vermont has always been a state that produces significantly more dairy than its residents can consume. Okay. So while we produce more dairy, we do still import product, and that's because the processors that are in state, and even the processors who take Vermont milk and process it out of state, just don't make everything that you find on the grocery store shelves. So I think there's always going to be dairy product coming in from out of state, whether that's the West Coast or the East Coast. That I think is something to take into consideration. But we have and will continue to produce significantly more dairy than our consumers could eat in any given year.
And I'm going to defer to Steve because he knows a lot more than I do on this.
And I think you can tell, even though there's less farms, almost as much or even more milk is being made than what has been in the past.
That's correct. Our milk production is relatively stable. So I have a few other charts that I think will help just show sort of the global dairy picture as far as numbers and production.
Yes.
So I think this percentage still 85%, give or take, goes out of state, 15% stays here, I think,
It's pretty close to that,
Yeah.
right? So we,
just for your, thank you.
right, roughly 3/4 of what we produce into finished product has to leave the state to find a consumer.
Yes.
So here we see another way of looking at dairy farm and cow numbers. So you can see, again, the orange lines are the number of cow dairy farms, the blue lines are the organic farms. Organic farms have been really steady around 200, and then both the pandemic and then the pandemic associated increase in supplies, and then some trade issues with feed, and then the floor really falling out of the organic market. We lost a number of organic farms in 21 and 22, 23, and that trend sort of has stabilized now. But you can see the average number of cows per farm has gone up. So we have fewer farms, roughly the same number of cows, but more cows on each individual operation. Here's another way of looking at dairy farm sizes. So this is for the past 10 years. So in 2023, you can see that we had 2013, we had 939 farms. 83% of those were considered small farm operations. In 2017, the certified small farm designation came into play. So that's 50 to 199 cows. So you can see that breakdown. It's still roughly 81% of farms fall into that less than 199 cow category. And then in 2023, you can start to see the real shift where the LFO, the large farm operations, and the medium farm operations are starting to grow. So what we are seeing as a trend, and again, this really mirrors the rest of the country, is that it's the small farms that are closing, those that are less than 50 cows, but really, I think those that are in the certified small farm are the most at risk. There's a lot of policy work on what's called ag of the middle, which is when you're not really small and you're not really big, and so you don't benefit from those opportunities to scale and receive those benefits, but you're not small enough that one person can manage the operation. And just some additional organic farm information. Most are milking less than 200 cows. There's about 10 that are medium farm operations, but they're still on the smaller side of medium farm. And we get a lot of questions about how many farms in the state are 100% grass-fed. Those farms go on a grass-fed truck. It's Organic Valley that picks up their milk unless they're producing their own products. And it's less than 20 because that is quite a difficult, challenging, and expensive production method. So here's the total pounds of cow milk produced. It does look quite steep, but the chart bars are at 500,000 pounds separating them. So it's actually not that much of a decrease between the high point at 2017 and this low point that you see at 2023. So it's relatively stable. There's also some weather factors and feed issues from 2023 that decreased milk production that may have just been a fluke of that particular year. And then again, for organic milk, it's about 5.5% of the total Vermont cow dairy milk volume. So it's not very much, but they are roughly 25% of our total farms. We are the second highest state in terms of number of organic farms to total farms. We were sort of neck and neck with Maine. Maine's lost a lot of conventional farms over the past few years, and so they now have a higher proportion of organic farms than we do, but between the two of us, we have the most.
How much organic is shipped out of the state? Do you have that?
Almost the vast majority of it leaves the state for consumption, and about half of it is processed out of state. So we have Organic Valley milk is processed into fluid milk at the plant in Barrie. And then a lot of organic milk from Organic Valley, and then all of the Stonyfield Associated Farmers milk goes to New Hampshire for processing into yogurt.
So not much organics being used for cheese, or it's too expensive of a product to make the cheese probably, unless it's the on-farm
Mhm.
production that does that in itself.
That's correct. So there's not a lot of large scale organic cheese production because consumers haven't quite shifted there as far as the quantity of cheese that they're buying. What we see in the marketplace is most organic dairy is sold as fluid milk and yogurt, and certainly there is some cheese, but most of the organic cheese that's produced in state is coming from either a small scale processor who buys organic milk from a farm, or from a farmstead creamery where they're milking their own organic animals.
We have one in New Haven, or Weaver Farm, you ever heard of them? They're two,
Mm-hmm.
women that had a cheese farm for 30 plus years. But as like all of us are getting older, and that's probably gonna go away in the next 10 years, which is a shame.
Do you have a sense of why, and you've probably said it already, really kind of just thinking back, but do you have a sense of why the smaller farms are going out?
Small farms are hard in a number of different ways. I would say that it's really like a confluence of circumstances. Usually they don't have off-farm labor. If they do, it may be one person. And so if you think about a small family farm, if it's a couple, one person of the couple may work off-farm for their job, and one person may work on-farm with either full-time or part-time hired help. With milk prices going up and down so much, that off-farm income oftentimes has to supplement the farm income. That's also where health insurance comes in. And I think in a lot of cases, the storyline has been the work is hard, the hours are long, you never take a vacation. And that's sort of a hard sell for the next generation to come in to take over those operations, particularly if the cash flow balance is not working out as a business. And as a young person who maybe is thinking about a family, maybe they don't want to miss all their kids' sports games and recitals. So I think thinking about that as a strategy for a person's livelihood can be challenging. What I do see is that there's a lot of excitement maybe around small farms using more alternative production strategies. So thinking about whether they're going to be their own processor, or maybe they're going to be seasonal, or maybe they're going to milk fewer cows intentionally so that they are producing less product that has to find a home. So I think the small farms are challenging in those ways. It's also really hard to find labor right now. I know that this committee has heard that, but farm labor in particular, finding people who want to get up early, they want to work long days, they want to be dirty and hot and cold and out and about doing things all days of the year is really hard. I do think that there's a passion, and there's some workforce development work that I'm engaged in where we do see younger people wanting to get into dairy, but maybe doing it differently. So I also think there's some succession planning issues where the older generation, they have run the farm the way they've run the farm, and they don't want to see that changed. And so they'd rather not farm than see the farm be run differently.
So drilling down into that a little bit deeper, because we are a committee of ag, but we're also government. Have you heard much complaint about the government hinders them versus helping them as far as in your conversations with these people?
What I have heard anecdotally over the years is that Vermont does have tighter regulations on farm production, but Vermont balances that with the technical assistance and support that's needed from both the regulatory and business assistance side so that people can make the decisions that are right for their farms. What I think is the greatest challenge that I have heard over the past, since COVID, really, so that's 4.5, 5 years, is that people, the price of everything's just gotten so much more expensive. So somebody needs to put in a manure pit. It may have been $150,000 a few years ago, and now it's $500,000, $600,000. And those types of costs of doing business, not because of any sort of regulation, but because concrete's more expensive and labor's more expensive, and finding the contractors, you're on a waiting list sometimes for 16 to 18 months. That really feels like more of a challenge as people are trying to make the right decisions for their businesses.
And the standards of how they want you to build that sometimes are different as well, and then can case on that for committee purpose as well. As I was a town select board member, we needed to build a salt shed. It's gonna cost us $17,000. The town says, well, go to the state, and see what the state says, see if we can get some money for that. And when it was all said and done, the state one was gonna cost us $134,000 for the same thing. Well, we built it for $17,000. So I can imagine that some of that work and requirements of what it is, actually doesn't help much.
Right, there are certain specifications, and there are some rules where, for example, in Vermont, you have to be able to store 180 days of manure, which means that things have to be a certain size based on the number of cows in your particular production strategy. So I think there are things that just make things cost more, and some of those are out of really anybody's control. All right, so here's dairy farms by species. The vast majority are cow dairy farms, small slice of goat, a smaller slice of sheep. I think what's really important to understand about this is that the state processes a lot of goat and sheep milk, and much of that is coming from out of state. So we're getting sheep milk from New York and Pennsylvania. As I mentioned earlier, we're getting some goat milk from Canada. Goat milk is also coming in from out of state. So there are these opportunities to think about, okay, well, maybe it can't be a small cow dairy farm because it's too expensive, but maybe we can figure out a way to support a small goat dairy farm coming in that can utilize the same amount of land for a goat dairy that can support these processors who need more milk for their products. The number of dairy processors in the state has been on the increase for the past 10 years. I think this is really positive news. The more value we can add to our milk here in state, the more of that income we keep within our borders to benefit the dairy community. You can see back in 2013, off-farm processors, there was 36, on-farm, there was 59. We've seen a real growth in the on-farm processors, which would be the real small-scale farmstead sized. If you were thinking about dairy back in the 2010s, UVM hosted the Vermont Institute for Artisan Cheese, VIAC, and that was a real opportunity for people within the state to learn from international experts about cheese making, and has been credited numerous times as being the reason why we have such a vibrant processing community in this state. That ceased to exist around 2010. And so I think what we see now is a lot of those cheesemakers who benefited are starting to look at retirement, and we don't have a training facility at this moment in time that's scale appropriate and accessible. And that's something that the other hat that I wear with the Dairy Innovation Center, we are looking at if we can revive a training facility in New England. But these numbers are really strong. They are going up. They continue to go up. There's a few more processors that are working on coming online in the next couple of years. And so we'll continue to see this opportunity grow. And then this chart just shows the processors by scale. So you can see the darker orange and the blue. Those are processors who are licensed to process less than 10,000 pounds a day. So this would be very small. And then even our larger plants, which is the 500,000 pounds and above, which is the smaller slice of the light orange on top, compared to plants in Texas and Idaho and New Mexico, all of our plants are quite small. Some of those plants out there are doing millions, tens of millions of pounds of product a day. So we do have some interesting competitive advantages in our size and our the consumer range that we're trying to hit based on the scale of the processors we have.
For those, I'm used to dairy in pounds. these gentlemen might want to hear it in gallons roughly, because it's about 8 pounds per gallon of milk. So if you do
Right.
the math, it tells you what they're processing.
So it's when it's on the farm and when it's on the truck, it's measured in pounds. So it's 100, it's called 100 weight. And that's roughly 8.8 gallons of milk, depending on the components. And then it goes to the processor and it is received by the processor as pounds. And then it is processed in volume. So either liters or gallons at that point. So it does change once it gets to the processor, but the processors themselves are licensed by how much milk they can receive or process each day in pounds. All right, so here's a little bit of information about where the milk goes for processing. It is different for the conventional versus the organic markets. So conventional milk, most of it is processed in state. The stars are indicating the larger facilities around the state. We process quite a bit of fluid milk, cheese, yogurt, and butter. And then we also have facilities like Franklin Foods, which is not indicated on here, that makes they make cream cheese. And so we do have a wide array of conventional milk processors who are making both their own brand and private label products that are shipped across the United States and internationally for consumption. On the organic milk side, about a quarter is processed in state. Most of it, again, is going to New Hampshire, to the Stonyfield plant to be turned into yogurt. Some is going to Massachusetts, and then a little bit to New York. The largest New York buyer is Upstate Niagara Cooperative, which does purchase milk from some of our organic producers and puts it into their organic product lines.
Why the disparity?
Between the two different types of processing.
Yes.
So organic milk can be processed at a conventional facility if the conventional facility is licensed for organic production and they do the proper types of cleaning between organic and conventional. So for example, the Hood plant in Barre does the processing of some of Organic Valley's fluid milk. We don't have a lot of fluid milk processing facilities at scale here, and most organic milk that is fluid at scale is processed into the cartons, and there's only a few facilities that do that here, and so the Hood plant is one of the major ones. I think because we have Stonyfield, that's a real asset. So one of the things that I think about a lot and what is a real priority in the way that I think about milk is that Vermont is not an island. We both can't consume nor can we process the amount of milk that we need, and we need our neighboring states for both of those things. And so organic milk, if you're not your own processor, you really only have 3 options for a buyer. You have Upstate Niagara in New York, so then your milk's going to go to New York for processing. You've got Organic Valley, most of which is processed here into fluid milk in Barre, or you have Stonyfield. And some Organic Valley milk goes to the Stonyfield facility. So there's just fewer options for where that milk can go.
If you take a gallon of each side by side, what are you gonna find different in something that isn't organic as far as milk versus organic? Are there chemicals or additive, or what are you gonna see different? Is it just the idea of, and a great idea. I'm not trying to minimize one or the other. It just as somebody's just feeling better about the way that organic is done. You know, the cows are treated better. They're fed differently. They're all of that. There is a lot less chance that there will be some chemical that gets added in there. What would be the difference between the two qualities of, or not qualities of, or containments, or what they have in them?
Right. So I would say that the real difference is organic farms are certified organic, which means there are particular production practices that they have to adhere by, including the number of days that cows have to have access to the outside, the amount of forage they're supposed to be grazing themselves and not fed in a barn. There's different practices for healthcare and management. There's certain drugs that they are not allowed to give their organic cows, particularly both drugs that help with like reproductive issues and maybe some health issues, antibiotics and so forth. And then there's other practices that are required around how calves are raised, when you cannot bring animals onto your farm to join your herd. So there's a lot of difference if you're looking at a conventional farm compared to an organic farm, particularly because organic farms in Vermont they adhere to the national organic standards, I would say maybe more strictly than some of the other organic farms that are in Idaho and Texas, where they have 3,000 cows on an operation. Those cows are not eating grass themselves. So there is a significant production difference. I would hesitate to say that there is a difference in the milk. There's never antibiotics in milk. All milk gets an antibiotic test before it's processed. If there is antibiotics found in the milk, it is dumped, and that producer gets notification that they're doing something wrong. So I would say that some organic milk may contain more omega-3s or other things like that. And I think there have been a number of studies that show the difference. But from the perspective of, is there anything that's markedly different between the milk? I would say that comes from the production practices, and less so the quality of the product.
So like a lot of difference in product, it's just that people feel better about the way the product came to them and about who produced the product as far as the animal producing. And I get that. It's just, yeah.
Right, it's definitely consumer choice drives the organic market.
Country cows to city cows, as I look at it.
So I just thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about production and consumption trends, because for a state like Vermont, where we rely on non-Vermonters to choose Vermont products, this is really important for us. So I know that you will hear from Vermont Farm to Plate about some of the work that they have done around the impact of the agricultural economy and the land base as a result of dairy. What I will say, so that you don't hear the same information twice, is that of all the states in the United States, Vermont is the most reliant on a single commodity, more so than any other state, and that is dairy. And that results in roughly 2/3 of our agricultural sales. The next, and that's in the billions of dollars, the next greatest agricultural product that we produce is maple, and that's in the millions of dollars. There is no other agricultural production market at this time that has the ability to step into the market and the economic impact that dairy has for this state. And it is unlike any other state in the US. So you can see here, total agricultural or top agricultural product by sales: milk from cows, 59.2%, maple syrup, 8%. Cattle numbers, most of those would be dairy cows. And then the top manufactured products, other dairy products, which is everything other than cheese, and then cheese. So really, dairy in so many ways is driving the Vermont economy. What we see is that while fluid milk consumption has been on the decline for decades, no surprise there that it continues to be on the decline. There was a very slight uptick in 2024 with the amount of fluid milk that people are purchasing, as dairy fat sort of becomes trendy and healthy again. What we see is that people are eating their dairy, and they're eating dairy at levels that we have not seen since the 1970s. So the cheese consumption is double what it was in the early 80s. You can see in the late 60s, it was at 10 pounds. We're now greater than 40 pounds per person per year. So it's a lot of cheese, which is amazing for us because Vermont makes millions and millions of pounds of cheese, and we want consumers to eat Vermont cheese.
I like pizza as much as the next guy. Is there a reason for this?
For cheese consumption?
Yes.
I think the driver is, I mean, cheese tastes great, right? So
Absolutely.
we like it on lots of things. And then there's these push from places that are maybe sort of like commodity, like the Pizza Huts of the world, where they can tell you, like, we have a whole pound of cheese on our pizza, and that guy down the street only has half a pound of cheese on their pizza. You know, don't you want the one with more cheese on it? And so I think companies are finding ways to incorporate more cheese into their products. Most of the cheese that we eat is mozzarella, so I think we are a real pizza loving, Italian food loving culture. So we do eat a lot of mozzarella, cheddar's right up there. Hispanic cheese is growing, so that would be like the cotijas and queso frescos of the world. Those are showing a real gain right now as well.
But there certainly was an attack on dairy, for almost nearly 20 years. And as you've noted, that seems to be lessened. People seem to realize that wasn't, I truly believe that dairy would be a superfood if we would reclassify it for all of what it does. So I'm glad to see that's on the rise.
So there are a lot of countries where people eat more than 60 pounds of cheese a year. So we're not quite there yet, but Denmark, France, no surprise there. They love their cheese. Other countries above 50 pounds. So we will not eat cheese in the same way as France will. I think that's a statement that has a lot of truth behind it, but we will continue to eat a lot of cheese, and cheese consumption continues to increase. Oddly enough, due to the Instagram influencer space, cottage cheese has seen its first market gains ever, I think. So cottage cheese is now gaining in popularity in ways that it never has before. So cottage cheese is trendy. And I think this chart is really important. So this talks about if you're a green state, you produce more than what your consumers can consume. If you're a red state, you don't produce enough. And that doesn't mean it's across all dairy product categories. It's just saying the volume of milk that you are producing will not satisfy the volume of milk needed for your consumers. And that's roughly 600 pounds per person per year. So you can see Vermont is a green state by far at 3,947 pounds per person per year, which means we need to get our product into those red states and into New York City, because even though New York is green, New York City really, there's a huge opportunity there. So we look a lot at Boston, New York City, and into the DC metro market areas as real growth opportunities for Vermont dairy products. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears to the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, if that feels like the next step.
You are driving the ship here.
Thank you. So the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is hosted at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. We are one of 4 regional USDA dairy business innovation centers funded through the 2018 Farm Bill. The other 3 are all university-based. So it's University of Wisconsin, which represents the upper Midwest, University of Tennessee, which represents the Southeast, and University of California, which represents the states along the Pacific coast. There is no center that represents the Rocky Mountain states. I'm not sure why. We applied competitively in 2018 and we were awarded in 2019 as a center. So we competed against all of the larger universities and some other centers in the Northeast and were selected for award. We serve 11 states, so Vermont in the middle, Maryland and Pennsylvania in the south, up to Maine. And so we really have to have an eye on what's happening in our region. Each Dairy Innovation Center was able to self-identify the region that they served. So we selected the region that aligns with the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, or NASDA, which is the National Organization of State Departments. So far today, we've received $53 million from USDA federal money, and that's been through a grant that we get each year that provides us with a little bit of money. So roughly $6 to $7 million a year. We were awarded $19 million in 2021 after the whole issue with Horizon leaving the area and dropping almost 90 farmers' contracts in our region. So I think what's interesting about our region, I talked a little bit about this earlier with Vermont and Maine having a lot of organic farms, is our region really is the most diverse dairy production region in the United States. So New York is the 5th largest for total milk production. As I mentioned previously, Vermont has the highest percent of dairy sales of any state in the nation. Rhode Island is 48th for milk production, only above Alaska and Hawaii. Every state in our region has an average herd size of less than 250 cows, and we have a large number of organic farms. So that diversity really gives us a lot of strength and opportunity in ways that other regions of the United States don't
Yeah, it
have.
sounds like they're tailored to the consumer market better and being reactive and proactive.
Right.
And, yeah.
So my team, so this is a project that I lead as part of my work. I have a team of 5 staff that do all of the work related to this center. And we've developed this investment strategy over time. USDA gave us the language at the top, which is pretty broad, that we have to invest in farms and processors. And we do this through 4 ways. One is connection to consumers. So people think that that's kind of an odd thing to have first. But what we know is that if we don't have products that speak to consumers, so people are reaching for a Vermont product, a New York product, they're going to reach for a product from who knows where, maybe Wisconsin, maybe Idaho, and we want them to be able to make that choice to choose a regionally produced product. Because if we don't sell it, then the downstream effects of that are impactful all the way to the farm. Second of all, we want to improve business management. So everybody that interacts with our programming, whether or not they get a grant from us, they could be receiving technical assistance. They could apply for a grant and not get it, but get them feedback. So they apply for a grant with a much stronger application the second time. We want them to come away with improved business management skills. We recognize that dairy is the cornerstone of rural communities across the region and a critical piece of the economic puzzle for those rural communities. And we want to be a leader in climate forward strategy. So everything that we invest in has something around either reducing fuel or electrification or changing packaging. So far we've awarded 367 projects with $33.8 million worth of funds. So that's all happened roughly in the past 4 years. 2020 was, while we were started, we didn't really do a lot for obvious reasons. So we really got started in January of 21. And goat, sheep, and cow are all eligible for these funds. These are all of the grants that we've made in the past 4 years. Each color represents a different program. So far we've received just over 1,000 applications. Every application is reviewed by 3 people. We have internal reviewers and we have about 100 external reviewers from across the country that help us make decisions on these awards, but a 36% award rate. Our average grant is just over $92,000 and our grant range is between $10,000 and $1 million. This map makes it really obvious where there's mountain ranges.
Or woods.
Right, or woods. So this chart shows the funds requested versus awarded by state. We've had the most funds requested from New York, which is no surprise. They have around 4,000 farms. So even if 10% of their farms apply for our grants, it's going to be more farms than almost every other state in our region. And Vermont has received the most awards to date. And that's because for the first couple of years, we had the best connection. We're located in Vermont. We have the best connection with the Vermont dairy community. That has really leveled out now. So the Vermont applications are sort of on par with what we'd expect to see from the number of farms. We also have incredible technical assistance and service providers here that help people with the applications. Rhode Island has just a handful. They've got 6 dairy farms. Connecticut's roughly about the same. So the fact that we've seen as many applications from them, I think, is a great, it's for them.
6 dairy farms, that's it in Rhode
Yes.
Island and Connecticut?
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. How big are they, do you know?
There's quite a large one in both of those states, like over 1,000 cows, but a lot of them are small still.
Yeah.
So in Vermont, we've awarded $11.6 million in grants to farms and processors. That's 125 total awards. We received 284 applications. And again, a slightly higher award rate at 44% just because we have a better connection here. And our average award is $92,000. We have done grants across the spectrum. So the smallest up to the largest, we had $1 million grant in Vermont recently.
And what are the grants for? You might have already told us that, but.
I'm gonna dive into those
Okay,
here
good.
coming up.
Right.
All right, so we make 3 different types of investments. We do competitive grants for dairy businesses, directed grants for research that will benefit the region, and then contracts for research. And those all follow state procurement guidelines. So that's pretty much why we do either grants or contracts. So this is the largest program we've ever done with the $19 million that we received. That was driven by a task force that I led along with Britt Lundgren from Stonyfield. When USDA said, tell us what we can do to give you support, we asked for something like $350 million and got $19 million. And part of that was to invest in processor expansion. So that was seen as a real opportunity. We need our processors in this state to remain vibrant and up to date and efficient. Otherwise, if they close down, then we don't have anywhere for our milk to go, or it's going to go out of state, and that's going to cost farmers a lot more money. So we committed to investing at least $12 million of that 19 into processing expansion.
Does it make you feel good that the number of processors are increasing?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes. That number to me shows that we are doing a good job marketing Vermont products, so there's demand.
Yeah.
We are making it accessible from the regulatory front for a very small processor to get going, or a medium scale. And the facilities that we have are staying online, so they're making investments in those facilities for efficiencies and product types. So that does hearten me when I look at those numbers, that we do have a growing number of processors. In this state, we invested in projects across the region. I wanted to highlight the Vermont projects here. So we did provide Cabot with $1 million for their Cabot facility, the Cabot plant, which produces the Cracker Cut cheese, which many of you may have seen. They come in this nice little package. You peel the top off and it's a perfectly square little piece of cheese. Before the grant, there were people that were like literally putting those slices of cheese in that package for hours and hours a day. 6 million packages a year was being hand packed. That's now completely automated as a result of the grant, and they're able to double their production capacity, and they don't have people standing there. So they've upskilled the employees, moved them to different jobs within the facility that makes better use of everybody's time and labor. Maplebrook Farm, which is in Bennington, received a grant that will increase their volume, processing efficiencies, and reduce energy use. They received about $500,000 and are already seeing impacts from that grant. And then Larson Farm, which is in Wells, is a very small scale farm-to processor. They make organic yogurt primarily, also gelato. They received $149,000 to get a new yogurt filler. So they were filling 2 containers at a time, almost by hand. And now they're doing something like 6 or 8 times more than they were able to do. So again, it's freeing up staff time. Labor is an issue all over the place. So if we can think about efficiencies in the packaging and processing lines, and that moves people into more valuable positions than filling containers. We've also done marketing and branding grants. These are some of our most impactful. So you can see Oak Knoll Dairy is a goat milk dairy. It was located in Windsor. It was purchased by a farm up in Greensboro. Their packaging was pretty plain for a number of years. They got this marketing and branding grant. They worked with a professional firm, which we require companies to do, and they came out with this beautiful new eye-catching packaging line. So we've done a number of rounds of this. All scales of processors have benefited, and then we have some grant impacts here. So you can see, as a result of the grant, somebody's online sales more than doubled over the course of a year. $50,000 more than the prior year in sales, and demand up 40%. One of the larger processors went from $750,000 to over $1 million as a result of the rebrand. So there's a lot of excitement and opportunity when we think about marketing and branding, and it's frequently the space that processors are not able to do themselves. they start that way with their own label that maybe, somebody draws for them or they get somebody to make. And then we do a professional rebrand and their sales go through the roof. So there is real opportunity there. On the farm side, we invest in farm modernization and innovation. These projects are just awesome. I love to understand what farmers are doing. Farmers are really excited about technology. I think sometimes it's just expensive and it feels out of their reach, or they don't have the right technical assistance to help them understand how to use it. So these projects allow them the opportunity to try something new. You can see here, this is a manure spreader that somebody in New Hampshire received. They use a bedded pack production facility, which is where you just put new layers of bedding on top of the old and it composts, and then you can spread it on the field. It's mainly used in smaller farms, but some larger farms are adopting it because it has huge differences to like water quality and manure management. But you can't just spread it in the same way. And so they got this spreader. It came from England, and instead of taking 15 trips to spread on one field, they can do it in 4, and it's much safer, and it spreads the material much more fine, so they aren't also getting compost manure in their hay, which is an issue. So it has a waterfall effect when we invest in a single piece of equipment. We've seen the same with manure scrapers in freestall barns. There's another project that we funded that got a scraper. They were scraping with their skid steer, putting fuel in it every 3 days, which diesel's not cheap, and so they were having to fuel it up all the time. Now they put fuel in it once every 3 weeks or less. The cows' feet are healthier, their milk quality has improved, and they're spending less money on bedding because those robots are cleaning the barns every 30 minutes as opposed to twice a day with a skid steer. And again, somebody's time is not driving the equipment, it's doing something of higher value.
I'll just mention for the committee's benefit, you probably noticed virtual fencing is listed too. Dan Smith was in yesterday.
Okay, great. We did fund that, part of that pilot, which is pretty exciting.
Cool.
On the farm side, we fund technical assistance cohorts as one of our opportunities as well. So technical assistance provider like University of Vermont or University of Maine or Cornell applies for money, and they lead groups of farmers in peer-to-peer education over the course of roughly 2 years. We just opened this opportunity up for processors as well and have 2 processor cohorts going. And what we see is when farmers are committed to technical assistance on a topic for 2 years with a group of people that are doing the same thing, they're on the same path, we get these really interesting results. People get a little bit more brave maybe to try new things if they're surrounded by people who are supportive of those decisions. So we funded 21 different cohorts. We have over 200 farmers participating. And a couple of outcomes of the cohorts. So the technical assistance providers help the farms make new decisions, adopt new production strategies, but they're also required to help the farms apply for other grants. So we see one of the farms here, Cleveland Farm, which is a Vermont farm, they had feed cost savings of $34,000 in the first year because they very intentionally and effectively put their cows out to graze. So they didn't have to buy as much purchase feed. And Scott Cleveland said, he should have done this 10 years ago. And then one of our other cohorts that was New Hampshire and Vermont, their cohort organization that was leading them helped them receive over $700,000 of additional investment in their farms for water quality projects or fencing and pasture. So just huge opportunities to support farmers in a number of ways. And finally, we do a lot in research and development. So we've done work on distribution, goat dairy sector development needs, sensory aspects of specialty cheese, how that, in that particular project, we were looking at all the way from what happens on farm as a driver of the taste that consumers prefer and how farmers can change their production to make a cheese that meets the needs of more consumers. It's very interesting. That was led by Roy DeRocher of UVM, who's just a sensory genius, and you should definitely have him in to talk to you about why that type of work is important. I think the one thing that I'm really excited about now is this workforce effort. So we did a study on workforce development needs in the region, and we are launching a workforce impact investment program. We'll be doing grants for workforce programming. We funded 3 so far that are existing programs through Cornell, the Ansoxaby Legacy Fund, and the Center for Dairy Excellence in Pennsylvania that all offer regional opportunities, but we'll be doing a competitive workforce program. And this really is going to help drive both program growth and their ability to reach new audiences and decrease the cost of participation. Also looking at things like offering workforce training for employers who have Spanish-speaking employees so that communication skills can increase, which then improves both worker morale, safety, and animal health and milk quality. So a lot of opportunity there. We're really excited to be in the workforce space and able to contribute positively to those projects. That's the end of the slide deck that I've got for you.
Wow.
Happy to answer any other questions.
Questions committee.
Yeah, I did, thank you, Mr. Chair. We didn't see it here when you were doing it, but I have so on page 12 of your slideshow, and I'm just kind of curious, we have fewer farms, but each farm, if you do the math kind of quickly, has more cows.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the dairy acreage has decreased by 36%. So to me, that there's a disparity there, and I'm just trying to understand, are they not going out to pasture? Are they staying inside, or how does that happen?
I did remove that slide because I know that Farm to Plate will be here, and that is a slide from them. So I felt like it was better answered by their expertise about where those numbers came from and what it means. I think what we do see is that some dairy farms have converted to beef production or to grains. There's been a real resurgence in growing grains for human use, so beer or bread making or distilling. So some of that acreage is transitioning. I don't know the specifics, and I think they will be able to answer that much more effectively.
Okay, thanks, Laura.
Anyone else? Laura, thank you. Very impressive, great presentation. We're a new committee except for one again, and every day we're building foundation into this committee, and before too long we'll be at a skyscraper level. But at that point in time, we're still learning, and it's very, very helpful and very impactful. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm happy to come back anytime with any other questions that you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.